I'm so happy to be joined today by an amazing founder, a philanthropist, and a new author, Ms. Hali Lee. And we had the privilege to meet one another at Worth's Techonomy event. And I'm so excited for our audience to be able to talk to you and hear your story. But before we jump into our entire program, I'm just really interested in letting the audience know a little bit about you. So can you share with us some of your background and how you came to be in these spaces that you're playing in today?
Yay! And so it's so nice to see you again, MiChaela, after the Worth Summit in New York. Gosh, that was just a few weeks ago. It's nice to be here. Thanks to Jim and all the other people who co-hosted that day. How much time you got to talk about my story, the background? So I'm Korean American. My family came to America in the late 60s after the Immigration Act of 1965, which opened up immigration to this country to people who were from big other places. Prior to that, it had primarily emphasized people from Western European countries. And so my family took advantage of that opportunity and came here to build a better life, like so many immigrants always, wherever they come from and go to. I grew up in Kansas City and had the benefit of attending some really wonderful public schools. My brother and I were always the only Asian kids at our schools until Kim Wong came in 5th grade, and we are friends to this day. Her family had a Chinese restaurant in town called Imperial Palace. And then I got to just continue having a wonderful education. You know, I left Kansas City to go to college on the East Coast and made a lot of great friends there. My parents have always supported me. It's one of my powers, I think, is that I stand on the sort of foundational support of their love, unwavering love and support, even though they never have understood what I do for a living and what my brother does for a living. They couldn't tell you to this day what either of us does, which is just like a joke at this point. But and as I mentioned before we started recording, I'm in New Mexico. Even though I live in New York City, I'm in New Mexico right now because they're elderly, 89 and 94, and I spend as much time with them as I can.
That's beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing. And something that I'm really curious that you talked about a lot at the Techonomy event was this whole idea of giving circles. So what exactly is a giving circle for those of us who might not be familiar with the concept, and why is it so important?
I'm so happy you asked. A giving circle, put simply, is a group of people who come together to pool their time, talent, treasure, testimony, and ties to do good together in their community, however they define it. To put a more concrete example out there, I started a giving circle, the Asian Women Giving Circle, with some girlfriends in New York City. There were 10 of us in that first circle. We put our money and our volunteer time and our connections into a pot, and we decided to support and fund Asian American artist activists. So women, girls, and gender-expansive folks who are doing what they can together to make their Asian American communities more joyful, free, fair, open for all, for more, using the tools of arts and narrative and culture to do so. It's been so much fun to do this work in sisterhood with friends. I want to say that this idea of giving circles has existed, I think, since humans have been living in communities. So basically forever. Koreans call it ge.
Okay.
My Mexican American friends call them tandas. You might have heard from West African or West Indian people the idea of susu or susu. My Indonesian buddy calls them arisan. My Ethiopian, Eritrean buddy calls them mahiber. This idea of pooling our money and our time and our treasure in order to help our friends and neighbors has existed always. Christians call it tithing. Jewish folks call it tzedakah. Muslim American peoples call it zakat. So I think the thing I'm trying to say in my book is that if we can remember and go back to these cultural heritages of care and community and mutual aid and support and giving and generosity, call it philanthropy if you want, but these forms of care and community care have existed before philanthropies existed as a profession. And I think part of what we can do to not rely so much on the billionaires who have taken over so much space in my sector and in our democracy is by reconnecting with those cultural roots of community care, mutual aid, and generosity and support.
That's so beautiful. And I love that you talked about how you're supporting other artists, other activists, and that this is something that you can see in all cultures, but it can be passed down from generation to generation. So I'm really curious, is this something that you learned about because your mother taught you or your grandmother? How did it really come to manifest in your life from the beginning?
That's a great question. My mom and dad, like I said, I grew up in Kansas City, and they were often, maybe always, part of a ge, and which is the Korean idea of pooling funds. And the way ge's work, let's say you and me and Jim and two other people, so 5 of us were in a ge. And I've been part of lots of ge's with my girlfriends in New York City. Let's say we get together at Ippudo for really good ramen, and it's not too expensive, about once a month. And depending on how rich we felt, we might decide to put, okay, this cycle, it's going to be $100 a month. You show up for lunch with $100 in cash that you put into the middle of the table. Then we take turns paying for lunch that month. Let's say it's your turn, MiChaela. You're going to pay that $100 for dinner, but you're going to take home the $500 in cash that's in the middle of the table because it's your turn. My turn might be next, and we'll go in a certain order at some order that we've decided. That's a pretty typical way that a lot of these shared savings circles work. You put money into a pot and you take it home. The twist that I did with my girlfriend, so my mom and dad were part of this with couples, and people do it in couples. Sometimes they do it mommy-daughter. You can do it in whatever configuration you want. I took that idea that I had learned from my mom and dad, just culturally growing up in, we're Korean American. I took that and added a philanthropic twist. So I was part of a girlfriend's ge, and we were, literally going to Ippudo once a month. And I realized that all of us around that table were making charitable or philanthropic gifts, but none of us was really being that thoughtful about it. Like, we had never said to ourselves, let's focus on women and girls in New York City, the city that we live in, or let's focus on Asian American families in the region. We had never really done that individually or as a group. And so that's part one. And then part two, how much more fun would it be if we did this thing together as girlfriends and had to fight and argue about how much money and where it was going to go? I bet it would be more fun and it would be stickier if we did it with buddies. And so that was the beginning of the Asian Women Giving Circle. And the Asian Women Giving Circle is turning 20 years old this year, which I cannot believe.
Wow. Congratulations.
I know. I can't believe it. Like, we've been through a lot of life together, as you can imagine. And our circle's grown. Of course, it's not the same 10 women, but we're turning 20 this year, and we've raised and given away on an all volunteer basis $1.5 million.
That's phenomenal.
Artists, activists in New York City. And, we're working people, middle class, professional people from lots of different backgrounds, culturally, ethnically, socioeconomically. But we've all decided that we can pool our money and raise money on top of that in order to do this good in our communities together.
That is so amazing. And I really love the fact that not only have you all been doing this for 20 years, but that it's this beautiful group of women who come from so many different backgrounds. It's really inspiring to see the longevity with something like this, but also the role of women in living well and doing a lot of good. And I'm really curious, is your group comprised of a lot of moms, grandmothers as well? Does it kind of span the gamut? What does that look like for you all?
Well, it's related to this metaphor of a kitchen table, which is sort of threads through my book. So, let me answer your question first, and then I can get to kitchen table. So the women in my giving circle right now, so there's about 20 to 25 of us on the steering committee. And then an additional, call it 150 to 250 additional people throw their money into our pot. And that's the money that we give away every year. We don't save any of it. Like, we save like $1,000 in case we want to throw a party, but we raise and give away whatever we do in a year. Right now, the steering committee probably ranges in age from 32 to 85. Ethnically, culturally, Asian American backgrounds, we range the gamut from Indonesian backgrounds, Filipina, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Taiwanese, Hong Kongese. I know I'm forgetting some people. They're going to kill me if they're listening, but we're pretty diverse in terms of.
But that's a good problem to have when you have so many different people.
There's a lot of different
part of the group.
Exactly. And immigration stories, like from immigrant to 5th generation through Hawaii, right? Like, And then in terms of professions, I would say roughly half nonprofit or philanthropy and roughly half corporate. Moms, I would say, I'm kind of guessing here, 2/3 moms, 1/3 not moms. Some of us are now in that sandwich generation where we have kids and we're helping care for elderly parents. But, like I mentioned, we're turning 20 this year. So over this time, we have gained jobs, lost jobs, gained spouses, lost spouses, welcomed fur babies, lost fur babies, welcomed and adopted children, and sent them off, to college and young adulthood. I mean, we're we even had a white woman in our circle once because she identified as part of an Asian American family. I mean, so I would say, pretty expansive about how we think about our community of generosity people.
That's amazing. And thank you so much for sharing. And you brought up an amazing point about this idea of a kitchen table. And I know you mean that both literally as well as figuratively. And at the Worth Economy event, you talked a little bit about your Aka and the impact that she had with her kitchen table. So I really love that story. I selfishly want to hear it again. So if you don't mind, can you please tell us how your Aka used her power and her literal kitchen table to bring people together and build more community?
Oh my gosh. And I know that's why you asked me to speak today, because I love that story too. Okay, so let's back up 1 second and talk about kitchen tables, because it is a metaphor and a theme throughout my book. And here's my book.
Yes, the big we.
So kitchen tables have been the locus of a lot of powerful organizing in America, always, especially for women, people of color, and queer folks. And the idea of a kitchen table as a powerful locus of organizing is really just that. Almost all of us have a kitchen table, or if not, a small living room where we can invite people to come, or we can be invited in to join another kitchen table or gathering to talk about our values, what keeps me up at night, what's my vision for my neighborhood, my block, my city. Like, these are important conversations to have in order to be an active citizen in this republic, this democracy that we live in. And the thing I add to the idea of a kitchen table is to add a seat or two, add a leaf or two to your kitchen table so that you can invite people in who are a little bit different than who you are and who your regulars might be. So like my giving circle, like I mentioned, we range in age from early 30s to mid 80s. We have moms and we have not moms. Like, it's that kind of difference that you want to think about as you're thinking about convening people around your kitchen table. So my mother-in-law, we call her Aka. She just turned 96. And the story I'm going to share, I know, and at the end of March, she turned 96 and she's doing great. She does Tai Chi and stretches and yoga every day. And she's super sharp and I adore her. And she's just like she's the matriarch of, this side of my family for sure. And she is adored. When she was around, I'm going to guess like 93-ish, there was an election happening. She lives in rural Connecticut, and a seat in her state, I believe, House of Connecticut was going to come up for election. And the incumbent was a man who was a little bit of an old boys network candidate, and he's a Republican. And there was an effort by some people to try to flip that seat to a younger candidate who happened to be a woman and who happened to be a Democrat. And my Aka is a Democrat. So she was interested in helping to flip this seat. So she reached out to the campaign and said, I've been in this community since the 70s. I know a lot of people. I'm 93 or however old she was. What can I do as a slightly older lady to help flip this seat? So they put their ideas together and they decided that Aka could host a weekly tea party around her kitchen table during the course of the summer that was going to lead up to the November election. Aka's table seats 8. So if you save a seat for the candidate named Maria and a seat for Aka, who is Aka, then that leaves 6 seats around her table for various townsfolk from her town and others who didn't know Aka really that well, but who knew of her, and also who were interested in meeting and learning more about this candidate who was trying to unseat the incumbent. So Aka figures that over the course of 12 weeks, so 12 tea parties that summer, she hosted about 75 people to one of her tea parties. That election happened in November, and it was so close that it went to a recount. The candidate that Aka was backing, Maria, won the recount, and she won that election by 64 votes.
Wow.
Remember that Aka hosted about 75 people around her table. In conversations after the election, and I just had dinner with the campaign manager a few months ago, and she still maintains that Aka's tea parties made a material difference in flipping that seat from one party to the other. Maria still holds that seat. And Aka, at the age of 93, helped make that happen. So I share this story wherever I talk a lot now because I'm trying to get people to buy my book. That story, I love that story so much because she was 93 and she has a kitchen table that holds 8, right? If she can do it, certainly we can do it. And she literally just invited people to invite their people and hosted 75 people over the course of the summer.
That's so powerful because, like you said, a lot of people, when they want to make a difference, they have these big dreams, these ideas. Sometimes they feel like they're just so large, we can't do it ourselves, and that it's just too far away from us, or we don't have a big enough name, not enough followers, things like that. So the fact that you have this story with your Aka saying, you know, at the ripe age of 90 something, I am going to make a difference is so incredibly powerful and inspiring to so many people. And that is really the entire point of using your power to make a difference. People tend to think that, you know, you have to be some huge figurehead in order to do that, but you don't. It's about your character and about the purpose and your determination. So I really love that story, as you can tell, because I asked to hear it again. And I know it. And obviously you love that story as well because it's in your book. Yeah. And that brings me to my next question about your idea of moving from this frame of me to we. I know you talk about that in your book, The Big We, and this was also picked up by Sweet July Books with Aisha Curry, which is phenomenal. Congratulations to you.
I know, it's so great.
So can you tell me a little bit more about this frame shift from me to we and what that means for people, both individually, but in terms of a society level?
Yeah. I think it's just a really useful frame. Exactly why you say, because I wake up some mornings not wanting to get out of bed. You know, there's just so much happening in the world that feels that's so big and feels so out of control, and anxiety and doom producing all the things. So it's easy to just feel like, what can I do as one human? You know, so I remember Aka, and I remember so many people in my book who did one thing, you know, and whether it was just invite people over to talk about ideas or to like raise money to fix the trash on the block, you know, or to get neighbors together to do a trash pickup. Like, these are small things that any of us can do. I start my book with a critique of billionaire, big dollar, often heroic, individualistic philanthropy. And I work in nonprofits and philanthropy, and I have for like 25 years. So I spend the first third of part one of my book as a critique of this kind of heroic billionaire, often white male hero, individualistic philanthropy. And I critique it from the point of view almost as an anti, you know, because a lot of good has been done, you know, like malaria and polio and developing COVID vaccines. Like, a lot of good has been done by this style of philanthropy, but I don't think that we can rely on this. I nicknamed this person Big Phil for, you know, big heroic philanthropy. Big Phil isn't going to save us, mostly because Big Phil has different incentives than most of the rest of us do. And for that, I think you only have to picture in your head the 3 men sitting behind Donald Trump on the dais when he was elected president. It was Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and Elon Musk. And those 3 men, who are cousins of Big Phil, who I write about in my book, those 3 men own and control more wealth than half of Americans. So it's those 3 men have as much wealth as 170 million Americans. And that's just like, wow. It's just so lopsided, you know? So the question for the rest of us, I think, is, do we want to orient and put and organize our time, our talent, our treasure, money, resources, in furtherance of Big Phil and the billionaires who are building, who are running philanthropy for the last 20 years, and now seemingly almost running our democracy? Or do we want to orient our time, talent, treasure, testimony, and ties, our resources and our volunteer time and our hearts and our minds and our networks and our energy towards building something that serves the rest of us, like who have the everyday concerns of working people, like we want good education and healthcare and some guidance and helping our elderly parents age and die well. These are and we want clean water and we want healthy food and we need streets and public safety, and fire departments that are responding to us and air traffic controllers that are helping us fly safely. These are the things that working everyday Americans care about. And that's the orientation that I sort of the shift that I urge in my book. Like we can either focus on these really rich people and further their dreams for this country, or we can shift to a more collective vision of what serves the rest of us, which is the big we. And what can we do every single day, to who we have over for dinner, where we go out to eat, how we spend our dollar, who am I going to hire to do my taxes? Like all of these things that we do are a statement of what's important to me, right? Every dollar, Pope Francis said it, like budgets are moral documents, so
absolutely
these decisions that we make actually reflect what's important to me, so just by shifting, not you don't have to do it every second of every day because that can be overwhelming, but just slowly sort of shifting, like how does this decision land differently if I'm thinking more about like my neighbors and my family, like big written large, not just my personal children, but my bigger family, how does it shift how I'm going to think about it if I move from a me position to a bigger we position? And then let me say one more thing, MiChaela, because now I'm on a rant. This relentless focusing on me, I, me, mine, is literally killing us. Americans are dying because we are lonely, because we are longing to belong, like a lot of writers more senior and smarter than me have written about this, but I try to summarize some of that in my book. I mean, loneliness is as dangerous to our health as smoking many cigarettes a day and drinking many glasses of wine a day. It's literally killing us. And what are some of the things we can do to combat the psychic, aspects of lonely and also the social aspects of being lonely? And I think part of the reason we have this is this relentless focusing on the heroic individual when actually the better solution is to do things together collectively.
Absolutely. You bring up so many amazing points. Dr. Vivek Murthy, who was Surgeon General, and selfishly, I have to shout him out because he is also a graduate of Yale University, where I attended. But he talked about this whole epidemic of loneliness. And a lot of people didn't really put a name to it until COVID came around because we are physically isolated. But this isn't something new in history at all. It's been happening throughout time. And I'm just glad that it's being talked about a little bit more, and just this need for connection, like you said, belonging. Here at 1-800-Flowers, we're all about relationships and cultivating that community. And so for people like you and I who are doing good work, want to inspire the community, we really need those relationships, not only in order to get things done, but to also fill up our own cups. You can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Yeah.
And the worst thing that can happen is that you get burnt out. So are there any people in particular for you? I know we've mentioned Aka, and Aka is amazing. Shout out to Aka. But are there any other people or women or other moms who help to pour into you and really cultivate your relationships and keep you from getting burnt out while you're doing this very good but very stressful work?
Gosh, I have so many women that have helped me and poured into me. And I totally second +1 on Dr. Murthy. I actually got him a book because his bestie from maybe high school is the cousin of my really good friend. So through
it is
that,
a small world.
through that,
see, relationships, right? They all come back to things like this.
I know. So I gave a book to Shalini. I said, write this thing in it and send it to your cousin who's going to. So I think he got a book. So hello, if you are listening, I'm a big fan. And his letter that was published in People magazine is just beautiful.
It is.
Okay, so I'm going to start with Erica Fox, who was maybe my first boss when I graduated from college. She was my boss at Planned Parenthood, and she taught me how to organize. And she was this big, jolly, kind of matronly white woman, which means she was probably younger than I am now, because I was just a kid then. But she had this huge smile. She taught me that like baking cookies and taking care of people and asking after their mom and dad and grandma and auntie was part of organizing. And she just like took me around with her as we were organizing in state capitals of Jefferson City, Missouri, and Topeka, Kansas, and knocking on doors. This was all for abortion rights. And this was in the 1990s, early 90s. And also because it's the Midwest agricultural fairs, and so we were going all over the place. So I learned a ton from her. I also think about the women who, a lot of us sent our kids to the same preschool. So we were young moms together and we've remained friends to this day. And they're part of my Stitch and Bitch. So I'm we have a long lasting group of women who we get together and knit and crochet and sometimes bitch about what's happening in our lives or whatever. And, we're irregular, but regular. So we've been going to get together for like 25 years, I guess, is the truth. And some of them have gone on to form a giving circle that is focusing on state legislatures, flipping state legislatures. And I really admire them because they have been meeting every week since 2017 to write postcards, to call legislators, to just get together and be in sisterhood and community and complain and be together. And they've raised money. And this was a group of women that was really scared to raise money. But now they've passed the $1 million mark in money raised towards doing some, working family good in states across the country. So I really admire them. And then I've also got to, of course, shout out my Asian Women Giving Circle sisters. We have so much fun together. Sometimes it's like herding cats to try to get them to do something simple. There's like the familial, oh my God, you're driving me crazy. But yet we manage to get together and eat and share good food, share good wine, share good times, but also talk about important and hard things, and also raise money every year for now starting our 20th year to support Asian American communities in New York City. And I want to share one sort of sad thing, but it's powerful that, I talk about the fun part a lot because, I love the fun. But, like when the Atlanta shootings of Asian American spa workers happened, and it was during one of the really hard times during COVID. And it was horrible, and there isn't really a spot, even in New York City, for Asian American people to go and be sad together or to get activated together. We have pockets, and sometimes it's this living room or this organization, or it'll spontaneously happen at this theater show, which I personally witnessed. But this community of Asian Women Giving Circle sisters, like we had Hali Lee died during COVID, and he's just a legendary photographer and social justice fighter from like Vietnam era on, like he was just such a steadfast presence in our community, and he died. And then soon after that, these Atlanta spa shootings happened. And it was these sisters of the Asian Women Giving Circle that totally got the toxic collision, the perfect storm of anti-immigrant sentiment, xenophobia, misogyny, the sexification of Asian women bodies, the othering, and each of us had experienced, I got shoulder shoved at a Trader Joe's. One of my sisters got shoved to the sidewalk on the Upper West Side. Someone got spat on, like we had experienced personally these instances of just hate directed at us because we look like we are immigrants and we're Asian. And this community was a lifeline for many of us during those hard times. So not only do the fun things happen, MiChaela, and we get to move money together and be sisters and have a lot of fun together, but these communities can also be a place of real necessary community and belonging when things get hard.
And it's important to talk about things like that, right? Like Jim recently published a newsletter about the art of suffering and what that looks like, because people are uncomfortable talking about the sad times. And I think that that leads further into this whole epidemic of loneliness, because
Totally.
people feel like they can only share the good things. Life is great. Everything is perfect. But then behind the scenes, you're breaking down and you don't really know how to create that community or talk to people about it. And there's this old saying that friends multiply happiness, but they'll divide sadness. And it sounds like that's what you really got from your giving circles in your communities. It's horrible that these things happen to you and to your community. And I'm very, very sorry for that. But I think that sharing your story helps other people to feel seen and will hopefully inspire them to talk about these sad times so that they get it off of their chest. They let other people know, hey, you're not alone in this situation. I've been there too, but we can still come together and be there for one another. And that is such a powerful thing.
It's a lifeline. I think you're totally right. And I think COVID, I'll look for Jim's article, and it's a very Buddhist sentiment, actually, that he's talking about, that suffering. The only thing we know for sure is that we will die, and we will die alone. But that doesn't mean we have to be alone forever and ever and ever in our life, in this lifetime, And I think you're totally right that it is connected with this epidemic of loneliness and belonging. And I think it's true that of all the epidemics out there, and there are many, right, and crises, this one of loneliness and belonging is one that doesn't have to cost $1 gajillion to address. Like we can, and mayors, and I write about this a little bit in my book, mayors across the world are experimenting with ways to make their cities smaller by doing things like installing chatty benches to encourage strangers to talk to one another, or putting bartering centers within senior centers so that you and I might show up to swap a blender for a Instapot.
Right.
But while
a Keurig.
a Keurig for a Bodum. But right. While we're there, we will also be encouraged to talk with the senior citizens who are also there for community and community center activities and stuff. So the mayors are realizing the economic benefits of encouraging their citizens to get together in these kinds of neighborly, communal, and civic-minded ways. And I think the really cool byproduct of that is connections and belonging and loose ties, which can lead to closer ties, both of which can be lifelines when things get hard.
Absolutely. And something that I'm also very curious about as we talk about this idea of building community, loneliness, and what that looks like, a lot of your background has been informed by your culture, but also what was passed down through your family, right? And as a mother yourself, how do you see that changing with your children, or how are you trying to basically encourage them to build out their own communities and find those lifelines so that they're not caught up in this loneliness epidemic as well?
Gosh, I wish I had a really succinct answer for you, but I kind of don't. I lucked out with my kids. I have 3 kids. They're really different from each other. I think that they got some things from me that I got from my parents, which is that, I just love them. I don't always get what they're doing or why, but I try to support them. And, I'm married to the same person for 30 years now, which I can't even believe. So Peter and I, we have managed to stay married. It hasn't always, it's never always easy, right? But my mom and dad managed to stay married. We've tried to be sort of foundationally just like supports for my kids. I talk about this a little bit in my book too, like this idea of being a good enough parent. It's from this, 1950s thinker, psychologist named D.W. Winnicott, who wrote about the importance of play and also the idea of being good enough. And, perfectionism is illusory and damaging, so he wrote about mothers, and I wish she'd wrote about fathers too, but it was the 50s, how important it is for mothers to be good enough. And sometimes it's important for kids to see you screw up. It's important for kids to see you lose your temper once in a while. It's important for kids to see you repair those instances when you screw up, because it gives them a more realistic sense of what being a human and being part of a family in a complex system is. I remember when that Sheryl Sandberg book came out, Lean In, and I was a young mom and I read it and I threw it across the room. I was so mad because, I went to Princeton, you went to Yale. I was working my ass off in nonprofits. I had 3 little kids, or I don't remember who was born at that point. I had little kids at home. and when she wrote something about, take that promotion if it means moving to London, it was just so unrealistic. And as I was reading it, I was like, if I can't do it with the perch that I'm in, with this great education and parents who have always loved me and a supportive spouse, and if it's so out of reach for me, it's got to be so out of reach for many, many, many more people. And it just pissed me off, and Amy, that Tiger Mom book came out around the same time. And that was like such a step back, I'm sorry to say, for Asian American women and families. And it just fed into the wrong stereotypes that aren't true about Asian American women and moms. And my friends joke with me that I'm more like a golden retriever mom than a tiger mom, but the assumption, that I'm this type of mom. And what's most infuriating about that assumption is that it strips agency from my kids. It's as if I'm like robot controlling them with a remote control to turn them into something that maybe they're not. It's just so offensive, and I found these 2 books came out when I was a younger mom, and they were just such a disservice. They just didn't help me or my friends navigate the world, so I hope that my kids kind of like I got things from my mom and dad, and even a grandfather. I don't know if I remember shared this story with you, but I have a grandfather who I never knew, who was a freedom fighter, during
Oh, wow.
my mom's father, during my mom's generation too, and also that generation, my grandparents' generation, lived through 100+ years of pretty brutal colonial rule by the Japanese Imperial Army. At that time, it was an imperial army, right? The emperor. And the colonizing Japanese people at that time wanted to erase Korean culture. Korean families had to take Japanese surnames. They killed off the Korean royal line. It was illegal to speak Korean. My grandmother took her kids out of school, including my mom, so that they wouldn't be inculcated in this erasure. And her husband, my grandfather, my mother's father, was a freedom fighter. And he was also a scholar of Korean culture. And he was taken away by the Japanese and nearly tortured and nearly killed while in prison for his crime of being a scholar and believing in the freedom of his people. And he was released on the day that Japan, or soon after Japan lost the war. And then 5 short years later, he was taken away by what became the North Korean army, because the civil war in Korea happened soon after World War II. And then he was never heard from again. And that left my grandmother, who died at the age of 97, and who was a big part of my young life. It left her to be a single mother to her 6 living children, the oldest daughter of whom was my mother. So though I never knew that maternal grandfather, I hope, if I'm lucky, that I inherited, like a pinky nail's worth of his values and courage and truth telling, in my bones. And if my kids are lucky, they inherited a little bit of that from him through my mom as well. So I don't know. It's mysterious. How do we pass on anything to our kids? And we can't always pick and choose what they get, and what they don't get. So, I don't know. We have to have faith and there, but for the grace of God and humility and grace, as we navigate parenthood, which is certainly a navigation. MiChaela, I don't know if you have kids, but
I do not yet. So I'm taking all of the mental and physical notes for whenever I do. I'll probably save the link to this episode so I can show myself in a few years when I have. I'll call you for advice. Look, we're forming a community right now for whenever I have kids, like future children. I don't know what your names will be. However, Hali Lee will be training me on what to do to be a good mother.
I love that. I'm here for it. And call my kids too. They might have a better answer for you than I do.
I could definitely do that. And to your earlier point, you share so many amazing and incredible stories, whether they're full of happiness, full of sadness, full of overcoming. And this idea of your Aka, your grandfather that you never were able to interact with, you can still see the determination and the love and the power throughout their stories, how you're living really their dreams as well, right? Keeping that history alive. And through your book, The Big We, now being able to pass on that knowledge. I think it's so powerful, not only for your children and your family, but for the whole community. So on a happier note, I just want to know, what was that moment like when you heard that Sweet July Books wanted to partner with you and Ayesha Curry, like an amazing celebrity, was interested in your book? Like, what did that moment feel like for you?
Disbelief. Like, I think my jaw literally dropped. And, my kids play basketball, so they have never been so shocked or maybe so impressed with me that it was that family that was investing in my book. And when the time came, I got offers from other presses. Like, I just can't even believe it. I have an actual agent, and she helped me write an actual book proposal that got interest from 6 different publishing houses. I just am kind of still stunned, even though it's been a year and a half, but I turned down Penguin Random House in order to pick Zando and Ayesha Curry. And turning down Penguin Random House, I mean, I'm new to this. This is my first book. It's like turning down Harvard, and it's hard for a Korean girl to turn down Harvard, But I just had this strong feeling, like, Zando is pretty new, and Molly Stern started Zando to try to disrupt the publishing industry by partnering with people like Ayesha, who have big followings, who love books, but who have other things going on, and books are going to be part of them. And I just have this good feeling, like, I got to go with the woman. I got to go with the disruptor. I got to go with Ayesha, because she just seems so great. And I've met her once, and she's so nice. And we talked about, she had a baby not that long ago, and we talked about babies, and she just couldn't have been more normal and approachable, and just really great. So far it's been wonderful, but it's new. We'll see. Like, this whole idea, I'm her first nonfiction book, and I think she had her first, it's brand new. Like, this is maybe her first year of publishing, and Zando itself is new, and they're partnering with other people. Like, John Legend has an imprint, Sarah Jessica Parker has an imprint, the Obama guys have an imprint, the Atlantic Monthly. So it's a cool model, and at this point, like, in my life, like, I don't need to go to Harvard. I want to do I want to try the new thing. I want to try the disruptive thing. I want to do the thing that's going to bring more voices that haven't been brought into books. That's like a primary mission of Zando and Ayesha. So I'm, obviously down for all of that.
And I love that. I love that you went with kind of the underdog in this space, right? And it's woman run, mother run. Like, that is so phenomenal. And on the topic of your book, I want to ask another question. I know you shared so many amazing stories, but is there another story that you haven't shared yet that's in your book that's one of your favorites?
Oh, God. Oh, I should have anticipated this. And, MiChaela, the cutting room floor is tragic. Like, I wrote like 1,000 pages, and then it's down to whatever, 100, whatever it is. And actually, I think the Aka story got cut. I don't think the Aka story is even in my book, but I tell it all the time because it's, of course, my favorite. Okay, I thought of a good one. Q-Wave. All right. So I think it was 2009. This is an Asian Women Giving Circle story. We got a grant application from this group of scrappy activists who were calling themselves Q-Wave. And they wanted to integrate the Chinatown official Lunar New Year parade in Chinatown to include gay and queer and trans folks in the parade. And to that point, you couldn't be out and march in that parade. So they wrote a grant, and they asked for $4,000. And of course, we funded it. And I'm pretty sure that our grant dollars paid for beer and Oreos and art supplies. So
good use of funds.
It's the best use of funds. So they could create puppets and rainbow colored dragon puppets and march in the parade, official permission or no. And they had not gotten official permission. So the night before the parade, and it was February, Lunar New Year fell on February, that cold, crisp winter day. They got official permission to march the night before the parade. They were kind of disappointed because they wanted to crash the party, but whatever, and we marched with them. And it was a total blast. It was beautiful, cold, New York, like one of those crisp, gorgeous blue sky winter days. And we had a blast. We marched that night. Peter and I are cooking dinner for our kids, and they're covered on my local, NPR affiliate. They were covered in Time Out New York. I think they might have even been covered in the Times, but I don't remember that for sure. And essentially, they made history. They integrated the official Lunar New Year parade to include gay and queer folks for the first time ever. They beat the Irish in that regard. We were their only funder who wasn't like a literal blood relative. And our grant was $4,000. And I love this story so much because it demonstrates what a group of scrappy activists can do, right? To literally change history in New York City, the official, parade in New York City. And it shows that a group of scrappy donors, philanthropists, a giving circle, can stand alongside this group of activists to change history alongside them. And they've gone on to do lots of cool things. That group of activists, not so young anymore, because that was, 2009, I think. And that parade has stayed integrated ever since. So they literally changed history, and it was our $4,000 helped them do it.
That's amazing. They changed history. You changed history. And I think it goes back to your earlier point of using your power, having that kitchen table, whether it's a literal kitchen table or building community where you're bringing people together, and that anybody can make a difference. And as we wrap up here, is there any piece of advice or any takeaway that you really want our audience to know?
I mean, this is kind of lame, MiChaela, but just do it. There are so many reasons that we tell ourselves not to do it. I'm not rich enough. I don't have the right friends. I don't know Oprah. I don't have whatever, But this book is full of stories of regular American people from all walks of life who literally just said, I can do this thing. And it can be hosting. It can be being invited. It could be bringing people together for a thing. It's not small. Sometimes you think it's really small, but it leads to bigger things. And sometimes it's small and it's perfect as something small, but especially now in the current environment where things feel so overwhelming and so hard, it's even more important, I think, just do that one thing. Join one organization. Do one thing, arm in arm with someone else. That's my takeaway.
I think that's a beautiful takeaway. And thank you so much for joining me today. It was so lovely hearing all of your stories today, ones that I listened to during Techonomy, but also new stories as well. So thank you so much. And we really appreciate having you here, Hali.
Thanks for having me, MiChaela. Say hi to everyone at your 1-800 team.
I absolutely will. Thank you so much and enjoy New Mexico. I hope it's beautiful down there.
It is.